We would like to send out a special thanks to HelloFresh.com for supporting The Trail Went Cold. And we would like to thank you, the listeners, by giving you the chance to receive $30 off your first week of deliveries when you go to HelloFresh.com and use the offer code COLD30. That's COLD30. Enjoy the show. June 4th, 1999. Wasilla, Alaska. While spending the night at a friend's house, 15-year-old Michael Palmer slips out to attend a graduation party. While biking home with friends, Michael vanishes without a trace, but his bicycle and sneakers are soon discovered at separate locations. Over a decade later, Michael's brother Chucky goes missing while riding a snow machine in the Talkeetna Mountains, but neither sibling has ever been found. After that, the trail went cold. Hello everyone, and welcome to the latest minisode of The Trail Went Cold. I'm your host Robin Warder, and today's minisode is a pretty unique one, as we will be covering the disappearances of two brothers from Alaska, Michael and Chucky Palmer. But this is not a case of siblings vanishing together. No, we're actually going to be chronicling two separate stories of two brothers who vanished over a decade apart from each other at different locations under entirely different circumstances. There are a few eerie parallels between the two disappearances. In both cases, the victim was traveling somewhere with a group of people before they apparently became separated from them and went missing. While search parties would eventually find Michael and Chucky's modes of transportation, no trace of either sibling was ever found. It's very unlikely that the two disappearances are connected, as the whole thing is just an astonishing coincidence, but this has to be an incredibly painful tragedy for the Palmer family, so both stories deserve to be explored. However, before we get started, just a brief reminder that The Trail Went Cold is a weekly podcast which alternates between our regular full-length episodes and shorter minisodes like this one. We deliver either a new full-length episode or a new minisode every Wednesday. We're currently available for download on several platforms including iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play Music, so if you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it, and please leave us a rating or review, because that will help us garner more exposure. The Trail Went Cold also has its own PayPal account and a donate button on our website. If there's anyone out there who wants to make a donation, we would greatly appreciate it, and we'll be sure to give you a shout out on a future episode. So with all that out of the way, it is now time to delve into the unsolved disappearances of Michael and Chucky Palmer. Our story begins in the town of Wasilla, Alaska in 1999. One of our central figures is 15-year-old Michael Palmer, who lives with his parents Charles and Lisa Palmer, his sister Hannah, and two older brothers, Chris and Charles Jr., who goes by the name Chucky. On June 3rd, Michael tells his family he is going out to spend the night at a friend's house, so he rides there after borrowing a bicycle from someone else. What the Palmer family didn't know is that Michael and three of his friends were planning to slip out and attend a graduation party. When Michael's mother phoned his friend's house that night, she was told the boys were sleeping in a clubhouse out back, and no one was aware that they had gone to this party, which was located in the Meadow Lake subdivision outside Wasilla and approximately 9 miles from the Palmer residence. This would be Michael's first major party, and according to his friends, he drank some beers there, but did not become noticeably intoxicated. At around 4 a.m. on June 4th, Michael and his three friends left the party on their bicycles, and according to his friends, they were all riding together on Pittman Road when he started lagging behind them and soon dropped out of sight. They decided to pull over at a 7-Eleven and wait for Michael to catch up, but he never arrived. Assuming that Michael had decided to split away from the group and head back to his house, his friends stopped waiting for him and rode away. But unfortunately, Michael never did make it home that morning. When Lisa Palmer noticed her son wasn't there, she contacted his friends, who told her they believed Michael had ridden back home. After not hearing from him, Lisa officially reported her son missing at around 3 p.m. A search of the area turned up no trace of Michael, but his bicycle was soon discovered in the Little Susitna River, which is located near Pittman Road. A search of the river was conducted to see if Michael might have fallen in and drowned or succumbed to hypothermia, but no body was found. The river was very shallow and flowed downstream towards a logjam, so if Michael's body was in there, it likely would have turned up. Tracker dogs could also not pick up Michael's scent at the river or in the nearby woods. However, there was a bit of controversy about the discovery of the bicycle, because Michael's brother Chris did not think it was the same bike which Michael had borrowed that night. There was another odd development when one of the teenagers who had attended the graduation party notified police that he found a pair of high-top Converse sneakers on his father's property next to a private airstrip. The location was 200 yards away from the Little Susitna River, and less than a mile from where Michael was last seen. The sneakers were wet and muddy, and matched the brand and size that Michael wore. Needless to say, the Palmer family did not believe Michael had just run off and disappeared voluntarily, and the discovery of the bicycle and his shoes seemed to confirm that. While there were rumors that fights had taken place at the party Michael attended, investigators interviewed teenagers who were there and uncovered no evidence that something had happened to Michael. Several months after he went missing, things took a darker turn when Michael's brothers heard that a local youth had been telling a story about seeing Michael being beaten and shot on a bridge. Upon learning this, Charles Palmer Sr. personally escorted this young man to the police station to share his story, and he showed them the bridge where the incident allegedly occurred. However, police began to poke holes in his story, and after flunking a polygraph, he finally recanted the story and admitted he made the whole thing up. Still, there was speculation Michael might have been attacked while riding home on his bicycle, and that at the very least, his three friends were not telling the whole story. Charles Sr. was always skeptical about their account of what happened that night, and ended up hiring 2 different private investigators to look into things. One of the investigators apparently left town because she was threatened, and the other one uncovered rumors that Michael might have never left the party and became the victim of a murder or kidnapping. Unfortunately, nothing could be substantiated, and the leads eventually dried up. There was no evidence to prove that Michael was a victim of foul play, but there was no evidence to prove he wasn't either. The disappearance took a major toll on the Palmer family, and Charles Sr. and Lisa wound up getting a divorce. Michael's case faded from the spotlight, but got some attention again after his family made the news for the worst reason imaginable. By the time 2010 rolled around, Chucky, the middle brother in the Palmer family, was 30 years old and had 3 daughters of his own. That spring, Chucky and the oldest Palmer brother, Chris, decided to take a trip to the Talkeetna Mountains with their stepfather and some of their friends. The group would travel nearly 70 miles from Wasilla and park their cars on Mastodon Road near Bald Mountain. They'd then use snow machines to navigate through the woods and stay at a cabin located 5 miles away. On April 10th, the group was already at the cabin and planning to do some more snow machining, but the handlebar on Chris's machine snapped off that morning, so he was forced to stay behind while everyone else went on their excursion. With the Palmer brothers' stepfather leading the way, the group left the cabin and rode their snow machines together through the woods. They eventually started heading back to the cabin on the main trail, but at around 7:15 p.m. or so, Chucky became separated from the group and headed off in the wrong direction. When Chucky did not return, he was reported missing the following morning. An extensive search was performed of the area, and Chucky's snow machine was eventually discovered on a side trail near Sheep River, about 12 miles from the cabin. It was apparent that after taking a wrong turn and getting lost, Chucky's snow machine eventually got stuck in some deep snow. It seemed likely he left on his own, but the snow was around waist deep in that area. While Chucky was dressed appropriately for the weather, he did not have a GPS device, survival gear, food, or water. The weather conditions would worsen and seriously hamper the search effort. There would be a total of 28 inches of snow, making it difficult for the search helicopter to travel through the air. No trace of Chucky could be found, not even blood or footprints, and the bad weather brought an end to the search effort after 5 days. Another search was conducted of the area in June after the spring thaw, but it still failed to turn up any trace of Chucky. Since it was assumed that he died of exposure, Chucky was legally declared dead 1 year later. Unfortunately, Chucky's body has never been recovered, and the disappearance of his brother Michael also continues to remain unsolved. So I guess you could say, the trail went cold. Before we continue, we would like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, HelloFresh.com, for supporting The Trail Went Cold. I always joke that if we ever made a podcast about my cooking skills, the closing line would be, I guess you could say, the meal went cold. That's why I'm very grateful for the convenience of HelloFresh, who save me a lot of time on shopping and cooking. HelloFresh is the meal kit delivery service that makes cooking more fun, so you can focus on the whole experience, not just the final plate. Each week, HelloFresh creates new delicious recipes with step-by-step instructions. Each recipe is designed to take around 30 minutes to make in your kitchen. The recipes are set up so that anyone can make a delicious and nutritious home-cooked meal in 30 minutes, whether you cook for yourself or are not so comfortable making home-cooked meals. HelloFresh sources the freshest ingredients, measured to the exact quantities needed, so there's no food waste. Everything is delivered to your doorstep in a recyclable, insulated box. It's a value of less than $10 per meal. I have teamed up with HelloFresh, and they are now offering everyone in our audience $30 off your first week of deliveries when you go to HelloFresh.com and use the offer code COLD30. That's COLD30. I've really enjoyed the meals HelloFresh has sent me. Just last night, in only 30 minutes, I was able to prepare a delicious Thai beef salad from them, complete with carrot and cucumber ribbons over jasmine rice. At the time, I was spending the evening working on this very episode, so this easy-to-cook dish was incredibly convenient for me. It's also the type of meal you folks would enjoy eating while listening to podcast episodes such as this. So once again, be sure to visit HelloFresh.com and use the code COLD30 to get $30 off your first week of deliveries. That's COLD30. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the show. Man, this is definitely one of the most heartbreaking stories ever featured on this podcast, and one person you have to feel particularly awful for is Chris Palmer. After Chucky went missing, he spent 4 days snow machining through the wilderness searching for Chucky, and said, "I never thought I'd have to do this shit ever again. 2 brothers aren't supposed to go missing from the same family. My brother's out there fucking starving. How am I going to eat?" The disappearance of Michael would have been difficult enough for Chris, but the loss of Chucky must be particularly painful, since he was present at the time, and probably wonders if things might have turned out differently if the handlebar in his snow machine hadn't snapped off, forcing him to stay behind at the cabin. During the group's trips through the woods, it was ordinarily Chris's job to ride at the rear to make sure nobody got lost, but since Chris couldn't go with them this time, Chucky assumed that responsibility. Unfortunately, he somehow got separated from everyone else, and nobody noticed until it was too late. It sounds like Chucky was somewhat inexperienced at this, and using a relatively new snow machine, so he probably just took a wrong turn somewhere and got lost. After the machine got stuck, Chucky could not find his way back to the rest of the group, but considering the machine was found 12 miles from the cabin, it was probably a hopeless endeavor, and he would have eventually succumbed to the elements. It's just a very tragic situation which could have happened to anyone. You might be wondering why Chucky's body was never found after the area was searched, but I've constantly referenced cases on this podcast where someone disappears in the wilderness and no trace of them ever turns up. If you've ever heard my episodes about Don Kemp or Mike Reamer, you'll know that it's not uncommon for search efforts to turn up empty when they look for a missing person in an area like this. Yet years later, someone just happens to stumble upon the victim's remains, which were there the whole time, but the initial searchers missed them. In many cases, the remains are spread around by animals and scavengers, so the only thing that's found is something small, like a jawbone or a partial skull fragment. It really shouldn't be surprising that no trace of Chucky was found, given that the search for him didn't start for over 12 hours after he went missing, and the area was hit with heavy snowfall. This might explain why no tracks or footprints were found in the vicinity of Chucky's snow machine, so they couldn't even figure out which direction he went in after he left. So we can only hope that someone traveling through that area might come across Chucky's remains someday, so that his family can at least give him a proper burial. So there probably isn't a whole lot more to talk about in regards to Chucky's story, since it seems like it was just a tragic case of him wandering off and dying of exposure. In spite of the remarkable circumstances of two brothers from the same family disappearing over a decade apart, it's safe to assume there isn't any connection between the two cases. While there are a few eerie similarities, the whole situation is nothing more than a 1 in a billion coincidence. While there isn't much mystery in regards to Chucky's disappearance, the same cannot be said for Michael's case, as there's definitely something very fishy going on there. The details here are a bit reminiscent of my episode about the Kurt Sova case, where a teenage boy went missing while attending a party and partaking in underage drinking, and you got the sense that there are at least a few people who are not telling the full truth about what happened. But unfortunately, it doesn't look like investigators had very much evidence to work with here. All we know is that Michael was biking with 3 friends, got separated from them, and vanished, and all that was found were his bicycle and his muddy sneakers. Since the little Susitna River was shallow and flowed downstream towards a logjam, I think it's safe to say that his body would have been recovered if it had been in there. I know that Chris Palmer expressed some skepticism that the bicycle found in the river was the same one Michael was riding that night. What's weird is that while the sources I found state that Michael borrowed the bike, none of them specify who he borrowed it from. Because if he borrowed the bike from Chris, then I would lend more credence to his opinion that it was a different bicycle. Otherwise, I'm not so sure Chris is correct. I mean, I guess it's possible that another bicycle could have wound up in that river for completely unrelated reasons, but it seems like too much of a coincidence that Michael's sneakers were found near an airstrip only 200 yards from the river. We probably can't be absolutely 100% certain that those shoes actually belonged to Michael, but since they were his brand and his size, they probably did, and I can't overlook the fact that the bicycle and the sneakers were found in such close proximity to each other. And those sneakers are definitely the most baffling element of this case for me. If Michael was murdered, it's odd that whoever was responsible would get rid of his body, but just leave his shoes out in the open like that. I mean, in cases where many teenagers go missing, the first inclination from the authorities is to push forward the theory that they simply ran away and would turn up eventually. But when the victim's shoes turn up, then that makes it a whole lot easier to discount the runaway theory. I have a feeling that the shoes were deliberately planted at that airstrip for a reason. We know that the son of the airstrip's owner attended the same party Michael did and notified police about the shoes, but not much else is known about this person. However, I do have to wonder if there's any significance to the shoes being left at this particular location. From the outset, it sounds like the Palmer family was always very skeptical about the story from Michael's 3 friends that he became separated from them and that they just waited around for him a little bit at the 7-Eleven, assumed Michael just rode home, and then left. The irony, of course, is that the exact same thing pretty much happened to Michael's brother a decade later, as he also went missing after becoming separated from a group of friends, but there's a big difference between an occurrence like this happening in the wilderness and a residential road. It would not surprise me at all if something happened to Michael during or after the party he attended. However, the big problem is that there seem to be a lot of rumors and innuendo about things which might have taken place that night, but no hard facts. It sounds like 2 private investigators hired by the Palmer family felt they were onto something when they looked into this, but there are no specifics. It doesn't sound like anyone involved in this situation has been caught in any serious lies, aside from the young man who claimed he saw Michael being murdered and thrown off a bridge, before he confessed to making the whole story up. Investigators did interview a lot of people who were at that party, but didn't seem to learn anything incriminating. One investigator was quoted as saying, "So far, everyone that was listed as a suspect has passed with flying colors." I read on a blog that the 3 friends Michael was riding with were successfully polygraphed, though I couldn't find any official news source to confirm this, so that info may be inaccurate. Even so, polygraphs are unreliable, so passing one wouldn't clear anybody. But let's not forget that all these people were teenagers, and teens are not very adept at orchestrating cover-ups, and sticking to their stories. If Michael's death is somehow related to something which happened during or after that party, I'd have to think that very few people know the full truth. I don't discount the possibility that Michael's 3 friends know more than they're telling, but it's not unlikely that Michael really could have become separated from them and crossed paths with an unknown individual who killed him. Hell, we're talking about a kid riding a bicycle in the middle of the night, so he also could have been the victim of a random hit-and-run accident, and the perpetrator hid his body to cover up the crime, though it doesn't sound like there was any noticeable damage to the bike. Even so, these are all fairly plausible theories, but no hard evidence points to any of them. However, the one thing which does seem certain is that Michael probably did not survive that night. All families who have a loved one go missing deserve answers, but this is doubly true for the Palmer family, since another one of their children would also go missing years later. Even worse, Chucky was a father himself by this point, and left behind 3 children. However, while Chucky's disappearance was nothing more than a case of tragic misfortune, it seems very likely that someone else is responsible for what happened to Michael, and that one or more people out there know exactly what happened, but have never talked. So if you have any information about the unsolved disappearances of Michael Palmer or Chucky Palmer, please contact the Alaska State Troopers at 907-745-2131. That's 907-745-2131. But if you just have your own theory about what happened in either of these cases, feel free to leave me a comment or send me an email at robin.warder@icloud.com. That's robin.warder@icloud.com. Before I close things off, I would like to take a moment to play a promo for a podcast which is relevant to today's minisode, as it covers true crime stories from Alaska. It's called Murder Under the Midnight Sun. Have a listen.
Hey guys, my name is Ariel Jane. I'm a longtime Alaskan and true crime junkie who decided to combine those 2 things into my podcast, Murder Under the Midnight Sun. I cover a wide variety of crimes from the 49th state, as well as the occasional case from somewhere else. So check out my podcast and you'll hear all about the dark side of this majestic state. Available on iTunes and Stitcher.
Just wanted to give a shout out to my supporters at the Unsolved Mysteries message board at the Sitcoms Online forum and the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit. We also have a new donor this week named Stephanie, so thank you very much, Stephanie. I need to provide a big thank you to Miguel Foote, who edits and assembles this podcast together for me, and Vince Nitro, who composes the eerie music you hear on every episode. If you haven't already, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, or leave us a rating or a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play Music. We also have a private Facebook discussion group for The Trail Went Cold, so if you want to discuss the podcast or its featured cases with myself or your fellow listeners, feel free to join at any time, and I'll approve your entry ASAP. Like I mentioned earlier, we also have a donate button on your website, so if you're feeling generous and want to express your appreciation for all the hard work we put into this podcast, we'd be extremely grateful. So have yourself a good week, and join me next Wednesday for a brand new episode of The Trail Went Cold.